I still remember the exact moment. The Christmas table was set with gleaming china, crystal glasses catching the light from the chandelier, and silver cutlery that had been in Thomas's family for generations. Everyone was seated with proper cloth napkins on their laps, everyone except me. In front of me sat a flimsy paper plate, a plastic cup, and disposable utensils still in their wrapper. Is something wrong? My mother-in-law Margaret's voice had that sweet tone she only used when other people were watching. No, I gestured at my place setting, trying to keep my voice steady. I think there's been a mix-up with the table. Margaret gave a little laugh that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, no, dear. No mix-up at all. She leaned in, still smiling for the benefit of the table, and whispered, "We saved the china for real family." 5 years of marriage to Thomas, and I was still using paper plates at his family's Christmas dinner. I looked across the table at my husband, hoping he'd noticed, but he was deep in conversation with his brother about their family business, the business his father had passed to both sons, though Thomas did all the work while James collected half the profits. The turkey tasted like cardboard as I carefully cut it with my plastic knife that bent with each slice. I'd spent the previous day helping Margaret in the kitchen, peeling potatoes and chopping vegetables, while she critiqued my technique. I'd swallowed every comment, every suggestion about how I should dress more appropriately, speak more softly, be more like James's wife Diane, who now sat across from me eating from fine china. "Elena, would you mind getting the serving spoon from the kitchen?" Margaret called down the table, interrupting my thoughts. "Of course." I stood up, the paper plate shifting precariously. As I walked to the kitchen, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. My carefully selected outfit, bought specifically to meet Margaret's approval, suddenly looked like a costume. Who had I become these past 5 years? In the kitchen, I gripped the counter and took deep breaths. When we first married, I'd told myself that Margaret's coldness was just her way, that it would take time to be accepted. I'd believed Thomas when he said, "Mom's just old-fashioned. Give her time." But 5 years later, nothing had changed. If anything, the slights had become more obvious, the exclusion more deliberate. I found the serving spoon and returned to the dining room, where the conversation had shifted to summer plans. "We're thinking the lake house for the 4th of July weekend," James was saying. "Elena and Thomas, you'll join us, of course." The lake house, another family tradition where I was tolerated but never welcomed. Last year, I'd been assigned the musty, pull-out sofa, while everyone else got proper bedrooms. Thomas had apologized, but slept in the room his mother had prepared for him anyway. "It's just for a few days," he'd said. "That sounds lovely," I lied, passing the serving spoon to Margaret, who took it without acknowledging me. "Wonderful." Margaret clasped her hands together. "I'll make all the arrangements. Thomas, remember to bring those files for your father to review. And James, your friend from college, what was his name? The investment banker, he should come too." "Ryan," James supplied. "I'll call him tomorrow." The conversation continued around me, plans being made, memories recalled, memories I couldn't share because they happened before Thomas and I met, or during family gatherings I hadn't been invited to. After dinner, the women gathered in the kitchen to clean up while the men retired to the den for brandy. This was another tradition, one that felt plucked from the 1950s. Diane expertly loaded the dishwasher while Margaret supervised. I was assigned to scraping leftovers into the trash. My paper plate went in last. "Such a lovely dinner, Margaret," Diane said. "Those potatoes were divine." "Thank you, dear. My mother's recipe, you know. I've been thinking of having you over to teach you properly. Family recipes should stay in the family." I pretended not to hear the emphasis on family or notice the conspiratorial smile between them. Instead, I focused on the task at hand, scraping congealed gravy into the garbage. "Elena," Margaret said suddenly, "be careful with that gravy boat. It's Wedgwood." I hadn't even been holding the gravy boat, but I nodded anyway. "Of course." Later, as Thomas drove us home through the snow-covered streets, I stared out the window at the Christmas lights blurring through my tears. "Did you have a good time?" he asked, oblivious. I turned to look at him. This man I'd married, this man who never seemed to notice how his family treated me. "Thomas, did you see what your mother did at dinner?" He glanced at me. "What do you mean?" "The paper plate. She gave me a paper plate while everyone else had china." He laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "Oh, that. Mom probably just ran out of settings." There were extras in the cabinet. I helped her set the table. Then it was probably just a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. She told me she saves the china for real family. Thomas's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "You must have misunderstood. Mom wouldn't say that." But she had, and we both knew it. This was our pattern. His family would slight me, I would point it out, and Thomas would minimize it, making me feel oversensitive or paranoid. You know what? Never mind. I turned back to the window, the hollow feeling in my chest expanding. Thomas reached over and patted my knee. "You're tired. Christmas is stressful for everyone. Let's just get home and relax." Home was our small apartment above the restaurant I'd opened 3 years ago. Thomas had initially been supportive of my dream to run my own place, but lately he'd been suggesting I sell it. "The hours are killing us," he'd say, or "we could use that money to buy a proper house." What he meant was that his mother disapproved of having a working daughter-in-law, especially one who worked nights and weekends in a restaurant. The apartment was dark and cold when we arrived. Thomas immediately headed for the shower while I sat at our small kitchen table, still in my coat. The Christmas tree we'd decorated together twinkled in the corner, but it failed to lift my spirits. Under it sat presents from my parents, who lived across the country and whom we rarely saw because holidays were always spent with Thomas's family. I pulled out my phone and called my best friend, Sarah. "Hey, how was the Christmas dinner from hell?" she answered. "Paper plate." I didn't need to explain further. "No." "Yes." "And plastic cutlery." "That witch." Sarah had been warning me about Margaret for years. What did Thomas say? What does he ever say? That I'm misunderstood, that his mother wouldn't do that, that I'm being too sensitive. "Elena." Sarah's voice was serious now. "How much longer are you going to live like this?" It was a question I'd been asking myself more and more lately. How much longer would I try to earn the approval of people who had decided, from the moment Thomas brought me home, that I wasn't good enough? How much longer would I pretend not to notice the slights, the exclusions, the whispered comments? "I don't know," I admitted. "I love him, Sarah." "Do you? Or do you love who you thought he was? Because the Thomas I'm seeing doesn't stand up for you, doesn't put you first, and doesn't seem to care that his family treats you like garbage." I didn't have an answer for that. Thomas emerged from the shower, and I quickly ended the call, promising to talk to Sarah tomorrow. That night, lying beside Thomas in bed, I made a decision. No more paper plates. No more accepting scraps of affection and inclusion. No more pretending that things would change if I just tried harder, dressed better, spoke less, or became invisible enough not to offend. Something had to give. The next morning, I woke early and headed down to my restaurant, the Wooden Spoon, to prepare for our annual post-Christmas brunch. It was a tradition I'd started the year after opening, a special event for regulars who wanted to escape their families or who had nowhere else to go during the holidays. The menu was prix-fixe, reservations required, and we always sold out. The kitchen was my sanctuary. Here, I wasn't Thomas's inappropriate wife or Margaret's disappointing daughter-in-law. I was Chef Elena, and I was good at what I did. The Wooden Spoon had started small, but we now had write-ups in local magazines and a loyal clientele. Last month, we'd been featured in a regional cooking publication, though I hadn't told Thomas's family about it. What was the point? Margaret would find some way to diminish it, as she did with all my accomplishments. My sous chef, Miguel, arrived at 6, followed by the rest of the staff. By 7, the kitchen was alive with activity. Bread baking, hollandaise being whisked, potatoes roasting. The familiar rhythm of a busy kitchen soothed me in a way nothing else could. "Chef, we've got a call." My hostess, Zoe, poked her head into the kitchen. "Someone asking if we can accommodate a party of 6 for brunch. I know we're booked, but they sound desperate." I glanced at the reservation list. "We're at capacity, but—" I thought about the empty table by the kitchen, the one we kept open for emergencies or VIPs. "Tell them to come at 11. We'll make it work." Zoe returned a few minutes later, looking uncomfortable. Chef? That group that just called. It's your in-laws." I nearly dropped the whisk I was holding. "What?" "Thomas's parents, his brother and sister-in-law, and some couple they're friends with. Thomas made the reservation. He said their original plans fell through and asked if you could squeeze them in." Of course he had. Without asking me, without considering what it would mean to have Margaret critiquing my restaurant, my food, my life's work. Typical Thomas. "Fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Put them at table 9. Table 9 was indeed by the kitchen, not the worst table, but certainly not the best. It was a small rebellion, but it felt good. At 11 sharp they arrived. Thomas led the way, followed by his parents, James and Diane and the Hendersons, family friends who had known Thomas since childhood. Thomas looked smug, as if he'd done me a favor by bringing his family to my restaurant. "Surprise," he said, kissing my cheek as I emerged from the kitchen to greet them. "Our brunch at the club was cancelled. Pipe burst or something. So I thought, why not support my talented wife?" Margaret's smile was tight as she air-kissed my cheek. "Such a unique little place you have, Elena. Thank you for accommodating us on short notice," my father-in-law said, ever the diplomat. "Thomas speaks so highly of your cooking." "We're happy to have you." I lied. "Let me show you to your table." I led them to table 9, aware of Margaret's eyes scanning the restaurant, no doubt cataloging everything she found lacking. The table was set perfectly. White tablecloth, polished silverware, proper napkins, and our best china plates. "I'll have the kitchen prepare a selection of our favorites for you," I said, professional smile firmly in place. "Thomas, a word?" I pulled my husband aside, keeping my voice low. A heads up would have been nice. He had the grace to look slightly abashed. "It was last minute, and I thought you'd be pleased. Mom never comes to the restaurant." "Exactly. She's made it clear what she thinks of my career." "You're being paranoid again." The dismissal stung. "Just serve us a nice meal, and maybe she'll finally see how talented you are." As if one meal could undo years of snubs and insults. But I nodded and returned to the kitchen, determined that everything would be perfect, not to impress Margaret, but to prove to myself that what I'd built mattered, regardless of her opinion. I personally oversaw every dish that went to table 9. The winter fruit salad with honey lavender dressing, the quiche with caramelized onions and Gruyere, the roasted tomato soup that had been featured in that magazine article, the bread still warm from the oven. From my vantage point in the kitchen, I could see Thomas's family through the pass. James and his father were in conversation, barely glancing at the food. Diane was picking at her salad, eating maybe 1 bite in 5. The Hendersons seemed to be enjoying themselves at least. And Margaret was examining each dish as if searching for flaws, taking tiny bites and whispering to Thomas. "Everything okay at the family table?" Miguel asked, noticing my distraction. "Fine," I said, turning back to the line. "Let's get the salmon ready for table 12. Later, as I brought out the dessert course, my signature chocolate bread pudding with bourbon caramel sauce, Margaret looked up at me with that same tight smile. "Everything has been interesting, Elena, though perhaps a bit too exotic for brunch. I've always believed brunch should be simple." "The Hendersons seem to be enjoying it," I pointed out, noting their clean plates. Well, they've always been adventurous eaters. The implication being that adventurous wasn't a compliment. I do wish you'd given us a better table, though. We're practically in the kitchen. We're completely booked today, I explained. This was the only table available. Most of our reservations were made weeks ago. Surely you could have moved some people around for family, she said, emphasizing the last word in a way that made it clear I wasn't included in that category. Before I could respond, there was a commotion at the door. A woman had entered carrying an enormous bouquet of flowers. Delivery for Chef Elena Martinez, she called. Zoe directed her to the kitchen, but not before everyone in the restaurant, including my in-laws, had seen the spectacular arrangement. I excused myself from table 9 and went to the kitchen, where the flowers waited on the prep table. The card read, "To the best chef in the city, congratulations on the James Beard nomination. You've earned this, Sarah and the gang." My hands trembled as I read the card again. The James Beard Awards were the Oscars of the food world. Being nominated, even just for a regional category, was huge. I had submitted an application months ago, but had convinced myself nothing would come of it. The official announcements weren't for another week, but Sarah had connections in the food industry. If she said I'd been nominated, it was true. What's that? Thomas had followed me into the kitchen. I handed him the card wordlessly. James Beard nomination. He looked confused. What's that? That he didn't know. That after 5 years of marriage to a chef, he had no idea what the James Beard Awards were. Said everything about how little interest he took in my world. It's a big deal, I said simply. One of the highest honors in the industry. Oh. He seemed unsure how to respond. That's great. Congratulations. He glanced back at his family's table. Should I tell them? I thought about Margaret's dismissive comments, about the paper plate, about years of being treated as less than. No, I decided. They wouldn't care anyway. But word travels fast in a small restaurant. Zoe had overheard, and soon the staff was congratulating me. A regular at the bar ordered champagne for the kitchen. The energy in the restaurant shifted. There was excitement, pride, celebration. From my in-laws' table, I could feel Margaret watching, no doubt wondering what the fuss was about. For once, I didn't care what she thought. This moment wasn't about her or Thomas, or proving myself to people who would never see my worth. It was about what I had built on my own despite them. As the brunch service wound down, Thomas's family prepared to leave. His father paid the bill, leaving a perfectly adequate but not generous tip, and Margaret approached me by the host's stand. "Thank you for fitting us in," she said, her voice carrying just enough for nearby tables to hear. Though I must say, I prefer traditional brunch. All these fancy ingredients seem like showing off. 5 years ago, I would have apologized. 1 year ago, I would have smiled tightly and said nothing. Today, with the card from Sarah burning a hole in my pocket and the respect of my peers filling the room, I found my voice. "I'm sorry the meal wasn't to your taste, Margaret. Perhaps next time you can bring your own paper plate." Her eyes widened with shock that I would reference her Christmas slight so publicly. Behind her, I saw Thomas's expression darken with embarrassment, not at his mother's behavior, but at mine for calling it out. That's when I knew. The problem wasn't just Margaret. It was Thomas, too. He would always choose his family's comfort over my dignity. He would always expect me to shrink myself to fit the box they'd created for me. As they left, Thomas lingered behind. "That was uncalled for," he hissed. "You embarrassed my mother in front of everyone." "And she humiliated me at Christmas dinner," I replied. "The difference is I did it to her face." "We'll talk about this at home," he said, the implied threat clear. There would be arguments, justifications, gaslighting. "Yes," I agreed. "We will." When the restaurant finally emptied and the staff had cleaned up, Miguel brought out a bottle of champagne he'd been saving. "For the nomination," he said, popping the cork. As we toasted in the empty restaurant, I felt a strange sense of calm. Tomorrow I would have that talk with Thomas. I would tell him that I deserved better, from his family, and from him. I would make it clear that things needed to change. And if they didn't, well, I had built something valuable here. I had created a place where people were nourished and welcomed, where good work was recognized, where I was respected. I didn't need a husband or in-laws who couldn't see my worth. I didn't know exactly what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never eat off a paper plate again. The apartment was dark when I finally made it upstairs after closing the restaurant. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, still in his dress clothes from brunch, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "We need to talk," he said as I closed the door behind me. "Yes, we do." I didn't take off my coat. Something told me I might need the armor. "You embarrassed my entire family today." His voice was low, controlled, the way it always was when he was truly angry. My mother was in tears after we left. "Your mother?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "The woman who made me eat Christmas dinner off a paper plate? Who told me to my face that she saves the china for real family? That woman's feelings are what you're concerned about." Thomas took a sip of his whiskey. "You're exaggerating again." Mom's explanation made perfect sense. They were running low on china because Aunt Susan brought an extra guest. Aunt Susan's extra guest got china. I counted Thomas. I helped set the table. "Why are you so determined to see slights where there aren't any?" He ran a hand through his hair, exasperated. "My family has been nothing but welcoming to you." 5 years of swallowed hurts and ignored dignity rose up in me like a wave. Welcoming. They've never welcomed me. Your mother talks about me like I'm the help. Your brother pretends I don't exist. Your father can't remember my name half the time. And you, I pointed at him, finally naming the betrayal that cut deepest. You let them do it. You see it happening and do nothing. That's not fair. I'm caught in the middle. There is no middle, Thomas. You're my husband. You're supposed to be on my side. He stood up, pacing to the window and back. I love you, Elena, but you're being unreasonable. You've always had this chip on your shoulder about my family. They're traditional, that's all. They have certain expectations. Like what? That I should be grateful they let me sit at their table? That I should ignore being served on paper plates while everyone else gets china? That I should smile while your mother tells me family recipes shouldn't leave the family, meaning I'm not family. Mom didn't mean it that way. Yes, she did. Stop making excuses for her. I was shouting now, years of bottled rage, finally finding its voice. And while we're at it, stop making excuses for yourself. You're a grown man who lets his mother treat his wife like garbage because it's easier than standing up to her. Thomas's face flushed with anger. You want to talk about respect? How about the way you disrespect my family's traditions? The way you're always working instead of attending family functions? The way you've turned this restaurant into some kind of substitute family because you can't be bothered to make an effort with mine. His words hit like a slap. The restaurant was my dream, my achievement, that he could frame it as a failing, as something I'd built because I couldn't fit into his family, showed how little he understood me. The restaurant isn't a substitute, Thomas. It's the real thing. It's where I'm valued for my skills, not judged for my background or my parents' bank account or the fact that I didn't go to the right schools. There you go again, bringing up class differences that nobody cares about but you. Your mother introduced me as the chef's daughter at your cousin's wedding, 5 years after we were married. Thomas waved this away. She was trying to help people understand your background. My background as a person with a job? Heaven forbid. We were talking in circles, as we always did when his family came up. Thomas unable or unwilling to see the pattern. Me unable to make him understand. I got nominated for a James Beard Award today, I said, changing tack. Do you even understand what that means? He had the grace to look slightly ashamed. I know it's important to you. It's not just important to me. It's important, period. It's like being nominated for an Oscar in the culinary world. That's great, Elena. Really. But what does that have to do with my family? Nothing. And everything. I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. 5 years, Thomas. 5 years I've tried to be what your family wants. I've dressed differently, spoken differently, swallowed every insult, and pretended I didn't notice every slight. I've spent holidays with your family instead of mine, learned to play bridge because your mother loves it, joined that awful country club where everyone looks through me. I've given up parts of myself, trying to fit into their world. And they've made efforts too, he insisted. Dad loaned us money to start the restaurant. That was an investment, not a gift. We pay interest, and he reminds me of it every time I see him. Well, what do you want, Elena? Thomas threw up his hands. What would make you happy? It was a question he'd never asked before, and it stopped me cold. What did I want? The answer came with surprising clarity. I want a husband who values me as much as he values his mother's approval. I want in-laws who treat me with basic respect, not as an interloper they have to tolerate. I want to stop feeling like I'm auditioning for a role in your family that I'm never going to get. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I do value you, he said finally, his voice softer, but they're my family, and I'm not. He didn't answer, which was answer enough. I think you should stay with your parents tonight, I said, the words coming out with calm certainty. You're kicking me out? He looked genuinely shocked. No, I'm asking for space. I need to think, and I can't do that with you here minimizing everything I feel. This is an overreaction. To what, Thomas? Years of disrespect? The fact that you care more about your mother's tears than your wife's dignity? Or the fact that on one of the biggest days of my career, you couldn't even be bothered to understand why it mattered? He stared at me like I was a stranger. Maybe I was. Maybe the woman who had accepted paper plates and second-class status was gone for good. Fine, he said finally. I'll go. But we're not done discussing this. No, we're not. After he left, I sat in the silent apartment for a long time. Despite the pain, there was a curious sense of lightness. For the first time in 5 years, I'd said exactly what I thought without filtering it through the lens of what Thomas or his family would find acceptable. I slept surprisingly well that night. The next morning, I woke to a text from Sarah. Heard you kicked Thomas to the curb. About time. Call me. News traveled fast in our circle. I called her as I made coffee. I didn't kick him out exactly, I clarified. I asked for space. Same difference. What happened? I told her about the paper plate, the brunch, the nomination, the fight. Saying it all out loud made it even clearer how broken things had become. So what's your plan? Sarah asked when I finished. I don't know yet, but I'm done being treated like I should be grateful for scraps of inclusion. Good, because I have news. Her voice took on that excited tone she got when she was about to drop something big. Remember Jefferson Lewis? Jefferson Lewis was a renowned restaurateur who owned a small empire of high-end eateries across the country. He'd visited the Wooden Spoon 6 months ago and raved about the food. Of course. He called me yesterday asking for your number. Apparently, he heard about the James Beard nomination and wants to talk to you about a partnership opportunity. My heart raced. Partnership? What kind of partnership? He wouldn't say exactly, but he mentioned expansion, investment, possibly opening a second location under his group's umbrella. That's wow. Yeah, wow. I gave him your number. Expect a call today. After hanging up with Sarah, I sat staring at my phone. A partnership with Jefferson Lewis could change everything. The Wooden Spoon could grow beyond what I could achieve alone. It would mean recognition, resources, opportunities I'd only dreamed of. But it would also mean tying myself even more firmly to this city, to a life that included Thomas and his family. Was that what I wanted? Before I could dive deeper into that question, the phone rang with an unknown number. Elena Martinez. Jefferson Lewis's smooth voice was instantly recognizable. I hope I'm not calling too early. Not at all, Mr. Lewis. Jefferson, please. I've been following your career since I ate at your restaurant. Remarkable food, honest but sophisticated. Exactly the kind of cooking I look for in a partner. We talked for nearly an hour. His vision aligned remarkably with mine. Quality ingredients, respect for tradition, but room for innovation, creating spaces that felt both special and welcoming. By the end of the call, he'd invited me to New York to tour his flagship restaurant and discuss specific terms. Take a few days to think about it, he said. This would be a significant change, but I believe we could do extraordinary things together. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. New York, a partnership with one of the most respected names in the industry, a chance to grow my restaurant into something bigger than I'd imagined. I was still processing when there was a knock at the apartment door. Assuming it was Thomas, I steeled myself for another confrontation. But when I opened the door, it was Margaret who stood there, immaculate in a camel hair coat, pearls gleaming at her throat. "May I come in?" she asked, voice crisp. Shocked into silence, I stepped aside to let her enter. She looked around our small apartment with barely concealed disdain. "Thomas is staying with us," she said, removing her gloves but not her coat, a clear signal she didn't intend to stay long. "He's quite upset." "I imagine he is." I didn't offer her coffee or a seat. This wasn't a social call. "Elena, I think we need to clear the air." She fixed me with that penetrating stare she'd perfected over decades of social dominance. "Your behavior yesterday was unacceptable." "My behavior?" I almost laughed. "Not the fact that you served me Christmas dinner on a paper plate? Not the fact that you told me to my face that you saved the china for real family? Thomas said you were fixating on that." She waved a dismissive hand. "It was simply a matter of having limited china. You're being oversensitive. There was plenty of china. I helped set the table." "Well, perhaps there was a mix-up." "It wasn't a mix-up, Margaret. It was deliberate, like every slight, every exclusion. Every time you've made it clear I'm not really part of your family. 5 years, and the best you can offer me is a paper plate." She pursed her lips, clearly unused to being challenged so directly. "I've always treated you fairly, considering the circumstances." "What circumstances?" "Thomas marrying a chef from a different background. It was unexpected. We had certain hopes for him." There it was, the unvarnished truth. I wasn't what they'd wanted for Thomas. Not rich enough, not from the right family, not willing to give up my career to be the kind of wife Margaret thought her son deserved. "I love my son," she continued. "I want what's best for him. And you don't think that's me." "I think he married impulsively, without considering the long-term implications. Your restaurant takes up so much of your time. Your priorities are clearly not aligned with family values." I thought about all the family events I'd attended, all the holidays spent with them instead of my own parents, all the compromises I'd made. "My priorities are exactly aligned with family values, Margaret, just not your version of them." She sighed, as if dealing with a particularly difficult child. "I didn't come here to argue. I came to suggest a solution." "What kind of solution?" "A divorce, handled quietly and with dignity. Thomas could cite irreconcilable differences. We would ensure you keep the restaurant, of course, and a fair settlement." The audacity of it, coming to my home to suggest I divorce her son, as if it were a business transaction to be negotiated, left me momentarily speechless. "You want me to divorce Thomas?" I finally managed. "I want what's best for both of you. This marriage has clearly run its course. Thomas needs a partner who understands his position in society, who can support his career without the distraction of her own ambitions." "Have you discussed this solution with Thomas?" "Not yet. I thought it would be better coming from you. A mutual decision to part ways." I shook my head, amazed at her presumption. "Margaret, I'm going to ask you to leave now. You haven't considered my proposal." There's nothing to consider. My marriage is between Thomas and me. If we decide to end it, that will be our decision, not yours. Her eyes narrowed. You've never been right for him. You do realize that, don't you? No matter how successful your little restaurant becomes, you'll never be one of us. The words were meant to wound, but instead they clarified everything. You're right, Margaret. I'll never be one of you, and thank God for that. I opened the door, making it clear our conversation was over. She gathered her purse with deliberate slowness. Think about what I've said, Elena. A clean break would be best for everyone. After she left, I stood in the middle of the apartment, mind racing. Margaret's visit had crystallized everything. The impossibility of ever truly being accepted by Thomas's family, the fundamental difference in how we viewed marriage and family. I picked up my phone and called Jefferson Lewis back. I'd like to take you up on that offer to visit New York, I said. How soon can we meet? 2 days later, I was on a plane to New York, my future wide open for the first time in years. I hadn't spoken to Thomas since our fight, though he'd called several times and left increasingly desperate messages. I'd texted only to say I needed space and would be out of town for a few days. New York was a revelation. Jefferson's flagship restaurant hummed with an energy that resonated with my own vision. His team was talented, dedicated, and treated with respect. By the end of my second day, we had the outline of a partnership agreement that would allow me to open a second Wooden Spoon location in New York, with Jefferson's group providing financial backing and operational support. We'd want you to split your time between locations, at least initially, Jefferson explained over dinner at his apartment overlooking Central Park. 3 weeks here, 1 week back home, until the new place is established. After that, you could structure it however works best. And I'd retain creative control. This was non-negotiable for me. Absolutely. Your vision is what makes the Wooden Spoon special. We'd be fools to interfere with that. It sounded perfect, a chance to grow my restaurant, to challenge myself in a new market, to build something on my own terms. There was just one complication, Thomas. Back at my hotel that night, I found 6 missed calls from him. I should have called back, but instead I texted, "Still need space. We'll be home tomorrow. We'll talk then." His response came immediately. "Where are you? Mom said you're planning to divorce me. Is that true?" Of course, Margaret had gone straight to Thomas after our conversation. I wasn't surprised, just tired of the manipulation. "Your mother doesn't speak for me," I texted back. "We'll talk when I get home." The flight back the next day gave me time to think. The partnership with Jefferson offered a path forward professionally, but my personal life remained unresolved. Did I want to end my marriage? Was there anything left to salvage? Or had the paper plate at Christmas dinner simply made visible what had been true all along? That I would never be considered real family by the people who mattered most to Thomas? When I unlocked the apartment door, Thomas was waiting. He looked terrible, unshaven, eyes red, clothes rumpled. "Where have you been?" he demanded. "I've been going out of my mind." "New York." I set down my bag. I had a business opportunity to explore. "New York? What business opportunity? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to think clearly without your input or your family's opinions." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture of frustration I knew well. "My mother came to see me at work yesterday. She said you're planning to divorce me." "That's not what I told her. She came here suggesting divorce as a solution to our problems." "She what?" For once, Thomas looked genuinely shocked. "She had no right to do that." "No, she didn't. Just like she had no right to serve me on a paper plate or treat me like an outsider for 5 years. Thomas sank onto the couch, looking defeated. "I don't know what to do, Elena. I love you, but my family—" "Your family will never accept me, Thomas. Not really. I've tried for 5 years to be what they want, and it's never been enough." "So you are leaving me?" His voice cracked. I sat down across from him, finally able to see our situation with painful clarity. I don't know, but I know I can't keep living like this, caught between your loyalty to your family and your love for me. What was this business opportunity in New York? I told him about Jefferson Lewis, the partnership offer, the second location. As I described it, I could see the realization dawning on him. This wasn't just about us or his family. This was about my future, my ambitions, my chance to grow beyond the constraints that had been placed on me. "You'd move to New York?" he asked when I finished. "Part-time, at least at first. I'd still have the restaurant here. And me? Where do I fit in this plan?" It was the right question, but I didn't have an answer. Could our marriage survive a partial long-distance arrangement? Would Thomas be willing to commute? Would he resent my success, seeing it as a choice against him and his family? "I don't know," I admitted. "That depends on whether things between us can change." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I won't go back to accepting scraps from your family. I won't pretend it's okay when they exclude me or belittle me. And I need a husband who stands with me, who puts our marriage first." Thomas was quiet for a long time. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally, "but I don't know if I can be what you're asking." His honesty, though painful, was a step forward. At least he wasn't dismissing my concerns or pretending things could continue as they were. "I think we need some real time apart," I said. "Not just a few days. I need to go to New York and set up the new restaurant. You need to decide what kind of life you want and whether I'm truly part of it." "How long?" 3 months, at least. I'll need that much time to get the new place running." He nodded slowly, resignation settling over his features. And then we'll see where we are." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I signed the partnership agreement with Jefferson, found a space for the new restaurant in the West Village, and began the process of hiring staff and developing a menu. Thomas and I maintained a careful distance, living in the same apartment but rarely seeing each other due to our opposing schedules. It was a preview of the separation to come, and there was a sad comfort in its inevitability. News of my partnership with Jefferson Lewis spread quickly through the local restaurant community. The regional paper ran a feature on me, highlighting the James Beard nomination and the expansion to New York. There was a photo of me in the kitchen of the Wooden Spoon, focused and confident at the pass. I didn't show the article to Thomas, but he found it anyway. "You look happy," he said, studying the photograph. "Happier than I've seen you in a long time." Because I was. Despite the uncertainty in my personal life, professionally I was soaring. The restaurant was busier than ever, and the New York venture represented everything I'd worked for. For the first time in years, I felt fully myself, not Thomas's inappropriate wife or Margaret's disappointing daughter-in-law, but Chef Elena Martinez, creator of the Wooden Spoon, James Beard nominee, Jefferson Lewis's newest partner. 2 days before I was set to leave for New York, Margaret appeared at the restaurant just as we were closing. I was wiping down the pass when Zoe came back to the kitchen. "Your mother-in-law is here," she said, making a face. "Should I tell her you're gone?" I sighed. "No, I'll talk to her." Margaret sat at the bar, still in her coat, looking out of place among the rustic wooden tables and open kitchen. She straightened when she saw me approach. "Elena," she said with a nod. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "We're closed, but you can have 5 minutes." Her eyes narrowed at my directness, but she didn't comment on it. "I understand you're leaving for New York soon. News travels fast. It's a small city." She smoothed her already perfect hair. "Thomas is devastated. Thomas and I have discussed it. This is a business opportunity one can't pass up." "Is it? Or is it an excuse to leave my son?" I sighed, already tired of this conversation. "Margaret, why are you here?" She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded newspaper, the article about my restaurant expansion. This made quite an impression. Jefferson Lewis is a significant name in the industry, I understand. Yes, he is. Thomas's father made some calls. Mr. Lewis has quite the reputation for identifying promising talent. Of course, they had checked up on Jefferson. The thought of Richard making calls, investigating my business partner, made my blood boil. Is there a point to this? Margaret set the newspaper down. The point, Elena, is that perhaps we've been hasty in our assessment of your restaurant. It seems you've built something of value here. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd ever given me, but it came 5 years too late. Thank you for noticing. We're hosting a dinner next weekend for some important clients of the firm. We'd like to hold it here. I almost laughed. After years of dismissing my restaurant, now that it had external validation, they wanted to use it as a showcase. The restaurant is booked solid for the next 3 months. Surely you could make an exception for family. There was that word again, family, used now as leverage when it had been withheld for so long. I don't make exceptions, Margaret. Not anymore. Not even for family. I emphasized the last word, and she flinched slightly. I see. She gathered her purse, dignity intact, but something new in her expression. Perhaps respect, or simply the recognition that the power dynamics had shifted. Thomas mentioned you'll be gone for several months. That's right. And after that? After that depends on Thomas and on whether things can change. I met her gaze directly. I won't come back to paper plates, Margaret. I deserve better. She stood, adjusting her coat. You've changed. No, I've just stopped pretending to be someone I'm not to make your son's life easier. For a moment, she looked like she might say something else. Instead, she nodded curtly and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. The nomination, the James Beard thing. That's significant, isn't it? Yes, it is. Then congratulations. That's quite an achievement. It wasn't warm, and it wasn't a reconciliation, but it was an acknowledgement. For Margaret, that was something. After she left, I finished closing the kitchen, went upstairs to our apartment, and began packing for New York. Thomas was working late at the office. Deliberately, I suspected, to avoid this moment. As I folded clothes into my suitcase, I found myself thinking about that Christmas dinner, about the paper plate that had crystallized 5 years of small humiliations. I thought about the fish fork Margaret had once corrected me for using incorrectly, the family recipes she'd never shared, the summer house bedroom I wasn't welcome in. But I also thought about the article in the newspaper, the partnership with Jefferson, the nomination that had validated everything I'd built. I'd been seeking approval from people who would never give it, when all along, I'd been creating my own path to success. Thomas came home as I was zipping the suitcase. He stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching me with eyes full of questions I wasn't sure he was ready to hear the answers to. So you're really going, he said. I'm really going. Will you come back? I straightened, looking at my husband, this man I'd loved enough to endure 5 years of subtle rejection from his family. I don't know, Thomas. That depends on what changes while I'm gone. What if I can't be what you need? What if I can't choose between you and my family? It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me about our situation. Then I guess we'll have our answer. He crossed the room and pulled me into an embrace that felt both familiar and distant, like hugging a memory. I do love you, Elena. I know, but sometimes love isn't enough. The next morning, I left for New York with 2 suitcases and a heart full of contradictions, grief for what might be ending, excitement for what was beginning, and underneath it all, a newfound certainty in my own worth. I didn't know if Thomas and I would find our way back to each other, or if his family would ever truly accept me. But I did know that I would never again accept a paper plate when I deserved china. 3 months later, the New York location of the Wooden Spoon opened to rave reviews. I stood in the bustling kitchen on opening night, watching my team execute the menu we'd spent months perfecting. feeling a sense of accomplishment unlike anything I'd experienced before. My phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "Congratulations on the opening. Mom asked for your address in New York. She wants to send something. Is that okay?" I hesitated, then replied, "Yes. 224 West 4th Street, apartment 3B. 2 days later, a package arrived. Inside was a single place setting of the family china, the pattern I'd eaten Christmas dinner next to but never from, along with a note in Margaret's precise handwriting. "Every family has its own traditions. Perhaps it's time for new ones." It wasn't an apology. Margaret wouldn't know how to give one, but it was an olive branch, an acknowledgement that things needed to change. That night I called Thomas. "I got your mother's package." "I know. She told me about it." He sounded different, more confident somehow, less the perpetual son and more the grown man. "I've been staying at James and Diane's since you left. Mom's not happy about it. You moved out of your parents' house." This was unexpected. I realized something after you left. I've been letting my family make my decisions for so long, I don't know who I am without their approval. That's not fair to me, and it's definitely not fair to you. No, it's not. I miss you, Elena. The apartment is empty without you. The city is empty without you. I closed my eyes, feeling the pull of home, of the life we'd built, complicated as it was. I miss you too, but I can't come back to the way things were. I know. I don't want that either. What if I came to New York, just for a visit, to see your new restaurant, to talk face to face? It was a small step, but it was in the right direction. I'd like that. There's one more thing. He took a deep breath. Mom wants to come too. Not with me, but after. To see the restaurant. Why? I think she's trying in her way. Dad showed her some reviews of the new place. She seemed impressed. I looked at the china plate on my counter. Margaret's gesture, inadequate but significant. She can come, but I'm not making any promises. Neither am I, except one. What's that? If we have dinner together while I'm there, all of us, everyone gets the same plates. Real china for everyone, or paper plates for everyone. No exceptions. I laughed, genuinely surprised. Did you actually say that to your mother? I did. She didn't like it, but she agreed. Will you look at that? I said, smiling into the phone. Thomas Coleman, standing up to his mother. The world must be ending. Not ending, he corrected. Just changing. Like us. We talked for another hour, about the restaurant, about his work, about the distance between us that wasn't just geographical. It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet. But it was a conversation between equals, between two people trying to figure out if their love was strong enough to overcome years of imbalance and hurt. I didn't know if Thomas and I would make it. I didn't know if Margaret's China Place setting was a genuine overture or just another manipulation. But I did know that I'd found my voice and my value, and I wouldn't lose them again. The next morning, I took the china plate Margaret had sent and placed it on the wall of my new restaurant, next to the framed article about the James Beard nomination, a reminder of where I'd come from and how far I'd traveled from paper plates to china, from seeking approval to creating success on my own terms. And if Thomas and I found our way back to each other, if his family eventually accepted me, that would be wonderful. But if not, if I ended up building my life and my restaurants without them, I would be okay. More than okay. I would be exactly who I was meant to be. Chef Elena Martinez, who served others on china but would never again accept a paper plate for herself.